everybody. So delighted this morning to interview Neil, who I've probably interviewed several times now. So Neil Morgan from Neil Morgan Designs. Neil, would you like to give us a bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Yeah, as I said before, I run a graphic design company based in Cheltenham, looking at all aspects of design, anything that needs a creative touch, I'm happy to get involved with, from small to large projects, across both print and digital medias, including augmented reality, which is sort of something I'm trying to get into more. I see myself as a guardian of my clients' brands, and that's a big statement, but I really work hard to try and protect my clients' brands, create brand awareness, brand recognition, and create brand trust through all the marketing collateral I produce. I mean, every job I do in some respects is a branding project. Yeah, so I work with small startups, working with them, sharing their passion, growing with them, up to SMEs, large corporates and national charities and everyone in between. So across many industry sectors. I've been in the creative sectors for over 35 years, working at agencies in London, Oxford and Cheltenham, and created my own company about 7 or 8 years ago. So that's me really in a nutshell.
Fantastic. So I'm sure you come across, I know it's one of the things you're very, very passionate about explaining, is explain to us the difference between brand and branding.
Yes, I mean, those two words get bandied around quite a lot, and there's a lot of sort of crossover, but I'm a strong believer in that they're actually quite different. I mean, you ask 10 brand specialists what they think about brand and branding, and they'll probably give you 10 different answers, but my take on it is brand is very much it's how people perceive you as an organization, your goods, your products, your services. It's your ethos, it's your personality as a business, it's what you believe in. And, you know, obviously there's that famous Jeff Bezos quote, which I'm sure we've all heard, you know, your brand is what people say about you when you've left the room, or worse to that effect. So your brand is very much a personal thing, personality thing. Branding is the visual representation of that, how people actually come to recognize you through logos, through your marketing collateral, through your social media posts, everything you produce. So they are similar, but they are different at the same time. And I think, you know, it's important to actually differentiate the two really in order to understand how you look at your brands as a whole, and then how you can implement branding to actually sort of, you know, communicate what your brand is.
And do you think sometimes, particularly newer businesses tend to start at the wrong end? They tend to start at the branding end rather than starting with the brand that underpins it all?
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done really before, you know, I mean, I come across people, oh, I got my logo, done my website, got my brand sorted, you know, and it's actually just flip that around a bit, actually do some market research, actually, have you got an offering? What are you offering? What's your services? Actually, sometimes I say, actually trade for 6 months before you even start to, you know, to look at really committing to creating some branding. I know that sounds a strange thing because people, you know, you need to have a badge, you need, people like to put, you know, pigeonhole themselves and put them, you know, to sort of place them somewhere. But I'm a strong believer in it. I think you need to really understand what your offering is before you can actually visually sell that. So, you know, sometimes you need to trade, say, 3 to 6 months before you even start to think about how you visually represent yourself. Because you know, you might have a fantastic idea, but as soon as you go to market, things change. You're speaking to different audiences, and those audiences need to be talked to and presented to in different ways. So you know, don't run before you can walk, is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what you're saying about that, because I think that, you know, talking about your offer and your offering is one of the places that we do a lot of work with our members on, because again, people start at the wrong end and they haven't got that clear, and they haven't got their target market clear, and they don't really know what the messages are, but they're out there marketing. And
yes,
so it is one of the fundamental cornerstones of any business to have that clarity around your offering and offering. So people, you know, get their branding done and starting to get their presence out in the marketplace. What's the importance of trying to monitor the effectiveness of that branding, and what are some of the things that you can do to judge that?
Yeah, like anything in business, I mean, I think it's important to review all aspects of your business, and brand and your branding is no different to that. You know, I think it's useful to constantly review things. I'd say every 6 months, a year at least. You know, because things do change in businesses. Make sure it's still relevant for a start off. I mean, obviously, we're just coming out of, you know, pandemic and lockdown and whatever, and you know, there's a lot of companies changed their services, their offering. They may have pivoted in lockdown, or sort of, you know, and it completely changed what they're offering and what they're selling. And so your branding and your brand ethos needs to reflect that. You may have new competitors, that sort of come on board. You may change locations. You may need to monitor the channels that you're communicating to your customers through, whether that be social media platforms, whether that be print mechanisms, other marketing tools. And I think it's just really useful to just sort of constantly ask yourself, how can I bolster and improve my brand awareness, really? Because it's I think it's one of the most important, if not the most important asset that any company of any size will ever have, their brand, and you need to monitor it and protect it, really.
So if people are looking at whether their branding's working or not, is there a couple of key questions that they could ask themselves to challenge the paradigm and to really look? It's easy to say review it, but how does somebody do that?
I think it's the nitty-gritty elements. It's the little details, really, and sort of are you actually delivering and walking the walk and talking the talk? Are you actually doing what you say you do? Which is, to some companies, they say one thing and then do another, which is, that's a very simple way of losing brand trust overnight. Trust is the difficult thing to gain and very easy to lose. So I don't know whether that really answers your question, really, but I sort of, but there's lots of things you can do to continually monitor and make sure that you're sort of, doing what you say on the tin, basically. And whether that's something that you can do internally, or whether that's something you get some external help from, because sometimes you see things very differently internally to an independent view.
So is that something you tend to offer your clients to do a regular brand review?
I do, yeah. I mean, I wear the independent hat, and I very much play on that because, to some of my clients, I'm actually a customer as well. So,
yes.
That's a real fantastic insight to them to actually sort of get a sort of a sort of customer point of view, really, and how how you're speaking to your customers. Does that come across properly? How you communicating with them? Are you on the right platforms? Is the language you use correct? All these sort of things. So that independent, you, as a business owner, quite rightly, you do get quite close to it sometimes, and probably sometimes too close. And sometimes you need an external source to actually just tell you things that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily see as a business owner. Things that are glaringly obvious, but you get so embedded, you can't see the wood for the trees, really.
Yeah, and maybe tell you things you don't want to hear, maybe, is the other part.
Well, there is always that as well. You do throw yourself open to hearing things that but sometimes those truths are as important as well. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So what are some of the simple things that people can do to achieve better brand recognition, would you say? What would be your top 5?
Oh, top 5. Yeah. Top 5. 5. Oh gosh, right. I don't know. Well, to start off with, the two most important words that I use any brand or branding project are consistency and coherency. And there's nothing wrong with consistency. Consistency isn't boring. I mean, those two tend to, I'm not saying everything you produce has to be exactly the same, but it takes a time to actually create brand recognition, especially for a new business. Don't expect to sort of hit all your sort of your customers straight away. That drip effect is very important. So consistency isn't boring, so keep at it. Maintain a coherency to everything you do through the language you use, through color, through sort of typography, through the style of your marketing collateral. I think people like to know who they're looking at. They have that sort of good gut feeling that they're actually sort of dealing with and communicating with a good bona fide company. And there's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of visual bombardment. We're visually bombarded on a day-to-day basis, whether that's through social media, through advertising, through media. And I think it's important that you, as a company, you cut through that and you actually create a clear message as to who you are, what your services are, and what you're trying to say. So yeah, I mean, sort of tone of voice is always important. How do you speak to people? How often do you speak to people? That's the biggest, one of the biggest things. How often do I post on social media? What do I say if I'm posting on social media? Is it relevant? Is it effective? Does it help to create brand awareness and brand trust. So all of these things. I suppose one of the biggest ones is actually, creating some brand guidelines for start off, which is something I do.
Yeah.
I mean, and sometimes people think, oh, I'm only a one-man band, I don't need brand guidelines, but I'd actually argue that the smaller the business, sometimes I think actually it's as important, if not more so important, to actually have some recognizable, tangible brand guidelines that you can actually work to. And that's everything from color. I mean, I could talk all morning and bore you to death about the power of color and sort of how color can work really effectively in a business, say through to typography, to general styling, all these sort of things, about storytelling, all these sort of things. So it could be just a one-page A4 brand guidelines, and I've taken 18 months to design brand guidelines for big corporates and have 2 big box files, so everything in between really. But I think it's really important to actually just put down on paper, perhaps your mission statement, what you're about, how you're communicating to your clients, and some basic, just very simple rules as to, how you go about doing that through your marketing collateral.
Yeah, we have created for the Business Kitchen does have it is an A4 page of brand guidelines, and it's mostly around the color codes and things for the total brand, but also taking out. So I guess one of the things for maybe people to think about is thinking about the colors and typography is they don't always translate very well across the different platforms, because, for example, the fonts that are available for a website are completely different potentially away for the fonts that are available on a members platform. And so is there something people can do to try and at least get something that looks in the same family?
Yeah, it is getting better. And obviously, if I'm creating brand guidelines for people, I'm very aware of the fact that, I've got a nice, I would call it a big Mac, but it's what I'm saying, a big Apple Mac, I've got a big screen, I see things, 5K ultra definition monitor, and it's very, high quality. And, I'm conscious that people work off different platforms, it might be PC-based software. So I'm very aware that, especially if I'm creating brand guidelines for people to then instigate internally, that I'm designing for them to actually instigate that. And now the crossover isn't as bad as it used to be. There's even on websites now, you can mainly use quite a lot of different typefaces that are accessible to different people. So the crossover is easier than it used to be. But you just need to be mindful of that, really, is to make sure that you're creating rules and templates that are practical for people to deliver, really. So
one of the things we're finding with our colours is that one of the platforms I use, although we're using the hex code, doesn't actually visually, it's not coming up as quite the same colour as it does on the PDF.
Even on my very sophisticated design software, I can sometimes key in different, the same colour representation for CMYK, RGB, hex, whatever, and there will be discrepancies. I can't control the brightness of your monitor. I have no control. I can only control the controllables. I can't control, how people, and that is a big thing these days, because there's so many different presets on monitors and screens and printers. I had a client the other day saying, "Oh, it's not printing out very well. It's not blue," and it ended up she hadn't got any blue toner in the cartridge. So so it's you can only control the controllables.
That would definitely do it. Yeah, it is frustrating though, because you can actually, if you're trying to do things, you can spend a lot of time trying to get it the same, and it's just never going to be the same because it is a completely different monitor or whatever. So it can be quite tricky. So a lot of people obviously go off and do their logos and what they think is their branding, although they haven't done the full piece. Using Fiverr or Guru or OWork or now AI probably.
So what
are the benefits and why is it important to employ somebody who's this is their profession, this is what they do as an expert? You have about 10 minutes now.
Obviously, I'm going to say this, aren't I? But I mean, I as I said before, I think your brand is a really important aspect to you, and where you present that through your branding should be really important. And the same as you use an accountant to create your end of year accounts, the same as you go to a solicitor to create a contract. You should see, I mean, I'm bigging myself up here, I know, but you see design process as important as that, because it's reflecting your company visually through your branding. So that's a really important thing. So I appreciate the sort of that times are difficult, and that DIY design is becoming more prevalent because people can, but just because you can doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And obviously we're all designers because we've all got graphics packages. We're all photographers because we've got iPhones, you know. So there's good ways of doing things and bad ways of doing things. Now, I do appreciate, you know, I'm not going to stand here and say that, you know, I can do it all, because when times are difficult, yeah, I appreciate that, you know, design and marketing can be perceived as a bit of a luxury, and the first thing that goes when, you know, you're trying to sort of cut costs. And what I suppose I'm saying is now is that I'm working more with clients to actually sort of work closely with them to actually maybe produce templates on. I mean, I hate Canva, but I appreciate that it's, you know, it's a facility that people use. So just working with clients to actually make sure that what they're doing internally and then themselves is still meeting, you know, or ticking all the boxes and sort of, you know, still consistent. So trying to help them to help themselves, really. So just maybe spend some time with a professional designer initially, and then try and sort of, you know, implement those rules and sort of styles and templates yourself. Yeah, it's how do you put a value on design? That's a whole new conversation, I know, but it's sort of you know, I like to try and justify my job, but it's becoming more and more difficult, I must admit. So, yeah.
I think one of the things that and I think it's one of the things for creatives to think about in their marketing messages a little bit is that I know when we did, some of you will know him, Rob Baxter did the original designs for the Business Kitchen, and the process of getting to the design was an incredibly valuable process, because it makes you think about all sorts of aspects of your business that maybe you haven't thought about. So as you know, your values, your missions, your target market, your personality, your offerings and all those things. So actually even just doing the briefing session actually can give a business a huge amount of value of looking at their business holistically. And I think that, you know, that's part of what you guys do, you know, and I think that's,
I mean, people say, what do I do? And you know, we came across this the other day when we talked about problem solving, and actually a lot of the time I see myself as a detective. I ask so many questions and try and delve under the skin of organizations to try and find out really what they're about. And perhaps ask some fairly searching questions sometimes as to, you know, what do they want from this? How are they looking to present themselves? And actually then, you know, I can't do my job until I have that knowledge. And sometimes an organization comes along and tells you what they think you should know, but actually then it's my job to actually work out what I really need to know, and actually then how to visually represent that in a way which is going to be appealing and practical and relevant to their market and their users. I get in trouble for saying this, but I tend to design not for my clients but for the end user. My clients pay the bills, but everything I do is not. Yes, it is for the clients. Don't get me wrong. I'm not arrogant, but it's designed for the end user, somebody who's going to be using this. You know, try to sort of work through what it's trying to say. So I very much see the end user as the starting point.
No, I would agree. I think that's a really important thing. And getting back to your comment about, you know, people tend to reduce their marketing and design when times are tough. You know, the reason I was saying, you know, you mend the roof when the sun's shining, not when it's pouring.
Yeah.
Because by then
design shouldn't be a luxury. It should be a necessity. So,
yeah, absolutely. So has anybody in the audience got a question for Neil before I hand over to Louise? Anna, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. That was great, Neil. Thank you very much for that. I was just wondering, because for small businesses, because it's usually just us or maybe one or two other people, so we are the face of the brand. And lately I've been hearing a lot about authenticity. You should be authentic. You should do this. You should show, you should share all the bit of your personal life. You should share what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, etc., etc. So what if you don't want to share that? Is that a hindrance or is it okay?
I think, I mean, I'm called Neil Morgan Design because people knew me. When I created my own company, I thought I'd create, you know, what can I call myself? Am I, you know, designers call themselves all wonderful, wacky names. But, you know, I thought, well, people know me and people come to me because they want to deal with me. We all know that people buy from people. And it is a case of creating relationships. However, I think you should always be in control of what you say and what you put out there. You know, you don't have to say everything about you. You know, some things are more private. But I suppose to answer your question, if people are, if authenticity, that's another word that is bandied around a lot and can mean many different things to many different people. But I suppose if you're a one-man band or a small organization, you are your company, you are your brand. So your personality needs to be reflected through that. Does that help, or sort of But I think you need to. It's up to you to control what you say about you and how how much you put out there. There's authentic and authentic in there. So you sort of need to be honest, but at the same time you can control what you say. Is really what I'm trying to say. So.
I think as well, and I think the other thing to think about, and it comes back to what Neil was saying, is for your target market, do they want to hear all that stuff? Is it relevant to the relationship they want with you doing the business or not? Because if it's not, then I wouldn't do it. But also the other thing is your personality can come through in the language and tone that you use in your business posts and things. So there's different ways of, as Neil says, people buy from people, so we want to know who is behind the name. But there's different ways of doing that rather than exposing your entire life to you. I mean, would you really want to put stuff out on social media given where it can potentially end up? No, I don't think so.
I mean, one of the biggest things I have, and I'm asked a lot, is, and I struggle with myself, is to whether you are the face of your organization, whether you plaster your face across social media, whether you sort of do videos, and a lot of people do that. A lot of people are very personal and very much a one-to-one, trying to sort of do that. It depends what you're trying to sell, and there's no one size fits all really. I know a lot of people who would run a mile from actually doing a video and putting themselves front and center. So it's really what you feel comfortable in, I think, and how much you feel that you want to give and put out there. So it is a balance, certainly. So, yeah.
Okay, our final question from Bob before we go over to Louise.
Yeah, it's so important to protect your brand. When I formed Niche Cocktails, the first thing I did was actually have it trademarked, because I thought if somebody gets hold of it, niche is a name that's probably used in every conversation every day. And I thought, so went to a trademark attorney, somebody that had got a reputation for winning every single case. And I thought, well, if they've got 100% track record, and that is for creating them and also protecting them, I can't go anywhere better. And it's paid dividends, because you can never get investment, you can never get funding if you haven't got your brand protected.
No, that's true.
And we've had several raises to raise money over the past few years, and nobody's going to touch you unless you've got it protected. I mean, if you watch Dragon's Den, the first thing they ask, have you got a trademark? Have you got this? Have you got that? Do you own the company? All the rest of it. You can't grow it without that protection.
Good point, well made. So thank you very much indeed, Neil. Interesting as always. And I'm going to hand over to Louise now.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Jill and Neil. Right, I'm going to interview Mr. Scott, and we're going to hear about cocktails now, one of my favourite subjects in the, just one of my favourite subjects. Right, Bob, so let's start with the start. How did you start your business and why?
I think it's how and why. So how was interesting. I started selling property overseas way back in the 1990s, late 90s, 2000s, etc. And every time I went abroad, I was bringing back bottles of drink. In those days, there was only this 100 millimeter centiliter limit. You could just bring back what you wanted. And if you look behind me, there's a few, and I've got another couple of hundred to my right, taking over a few years. I can honestly say the best journey I had was from Spain with 13 litres of spirit, 13 bottles. And I had a friend carry 4 and I carried the rest. And that was fine. And going back to 2004, 5, 6, the only networking was BNI. So that was it. It was either that or nothing. So it went to BNI, and having all these bottles, I thought, right, I'm going to make life interesting. And I started making cocktails at 6, or making them and taking them in 6:30 in the morning. Not every week, but certainly twice a month. And it got people rather happy. They were very pleased, and I did all sorts of colours. I'm very 70s cocktails. I love colours: green, blue, purple, white, whatever it might be, because I was just experimenting. one day, two of the members actually come up to me and said, Bob, why don't you do that as a living? Why don't you make cocktails and be an event person? And I thought, I've never thought of that. Now, I thought of the name, but I've got the name in my head. So obviously I didn't trademark it straight away. I got somebody to do the marketing. And, you know, if you look at the design on the cans, they're absolutely fantastic. Now, I started off, so forget the cans for a moment. So 10 years ago, I started Niche Cocktails as an event business. So that was how I did it. And I gradually built up the business. So I started off with 30, 40 people, you know, 50, 60, couple of hundred. The last party I did for lockdown was about 350. And during that time, and this is the why, during that time, I was thinking, well, why am I selling Gordon's gin? Why am I selling Jack Daniels? Why can't I sell my own? So in 2018, I went to an innovation hub and got talking to people, and they said, that's interesting. And I said, look, I've trademarked the name. I trademarked it years ago. And they said, you know, I think you've got a point here, but we won't do bottles because there's a lot of venues where you can't use glass. So you can't use glass in any festival. So you take Glastonbury, you take anything, you can't take glass. I did some events at the NEC. I did some at Excel as an event business. Couldn't have glass. And I thought, oh, right. So I had to put, at that time, I had to put everything in plastic. So they said, right, we're going to put it in tins. And we're the only company at the time to do this little stubby, and that's 150 mil. Now, the reason that's 150 mil is this is 12%. So you don't want too big a cocktail. So the how is when I was at BI making cocktails for everybody, and everybody thought, And the why is, having done that for a few years, well, why am I selling somebody else's drink? So Innovation Hub went there because I trademarked it, because I'd got some ideas that started. So we went, talked about it 2018, 2019. We got all the flavors. So this to get the flavors took 9 months at least. To get the branding, going back to branding, that took at least 9 months. I mean, I've got all the back designs because we went through it and through it and through it. And it isn't just the cans. If you look at the website, you can see it's all, the whole message goes through. So that's how, and that's why I've got my own cocktails, and every can has got my name on it.
Amazing, yeah, amazing. So going back, so you used to offer yourself as a bar then and go to parties?
Yeah, that's it.
And you still do that, Bob?
I don't because I've got a bit of a mobility problem, which has caused me some anxiety. So I'm waiting for an operation. But ironically, I've got some people that can help me. So how I've got over it, because carrying bottles and all this sort of stuff is incredibly heavy. So ironically, I'm doing what I sort of set out to do. I'm actually going to events. I'll give an example. Somebody came up to me some months ago now and said, look, I've just been let down from my daughter's hen party. It's Saturday and today was Thursday. And I said, look, I can't go and get all these spirits, but what I can do is we've got some pre-made cocktails. We can get them shipped to you. I'll come along and do it. And he's just said, brilliant. And that's what we did. So I've done a couple of events last year, but they're all to do with selling the pre-made cocktails, either sell them made or we'll sell them in boxes, which we do for the trade. So just on hold for the moment. I've got a few helpers. So, because I love doing it. I mean, what better job could you get paid for watching people getting smashed? I mean, you know, it's just, you try and watch somebody go up the stairs when they've had a few. It's just wonderful.
You're not wrong, you're really not. And everyone's enjoying themselves. So you've done a few hen parties. Well, any funny stories from hen parties?
Well, yeah, there's one interesting one, which was quite early on. And went along with it. I had somebody with me, started serving the drinks and all the rest of it. And who was to turn up? A butler in the buff. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a butler in the buff, but all they wear...
I haven't. I've heard of them, yeah.
All they wear is a penny. and nothing else. So they have a bare bum
Yeah.
and bare everything else. But they have a penny, they can put their things in, and that's fine. And so that was going great. And what was nice for us is because they pay for the butler, and effectively they often go to events where they've got nothing to do. So we gave them the drinks to serve the drinks, and that was finally going on. And it's getting more and more raucous. There's 16, yes. And they go up to him and said, well, what, you know, how long have you got? And he'd been paid for 2 hours. And they said, look, we want you to stay a bit longer. And he said, look, it's 60 quid an hour. So they clubbed together, gave him the money. And then they started playing Twister. And I thought, oh, now that could be interesting. So I left. So I've got no idea what happened. So if you played Twister with them, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
I just let, yeah, fine, okay. And that was, yeah. So I thought, if I'm not there, I can't see it. I can't report on it. I can't do anything. So I literally just said, look, I need to go. And I just left them all the drink. And I went back the next day. I thought, it's just not, no. So privacy is insured with me.
Yes, it's better not knowing sometimes, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. If you go on a train, that's it. I'll have a can of one of those.
Yep.
Not all the time, but I like, you know, can of those gin and tonic or what have you.
Whatever. Yeah.
How does your tins compare to the likes of those?
Right. I can honestly say, because I spent 9 months with everybody else tasting, and I mean, we had one tasting session once. We had to get a taxi home. I mean, excellent. But no, we won't go into that. I will put our cocktails in a blind taste up against anybody, any brand, anything. I'll give an example. I got found by, which was the airline? I've forgotten. Branson's on LinkedIn about 4 years ago, and they found us on LinkedIn, and they said, we're looking at canned cocktails on the plane. Would you send us some samples? And we said, yeah, okay. So we sent them 6 samples. They tested 35. We found out ours came second, or one of them came second. The gin fizz came second. What came first was a cocktail we don't do, so we couldn't have come first. And all the other 5 were in the top 7. Wow. And we thought, well, if that's blind tasting, so 35, we had 5 in the top 7. And then lockdown happened and they stopped flying and we never got the business.
No.
So that was just, the timing was just horrendous, because I think we sent them to them in 2019. And 2020, March the 23rd, obviously everything stopped, planes, trains, the whole lot. Mm-hmm. So may go back to them. But the point is, if you look at the labels, you may be thwarted. Now, for instance, Aldi in 2018 won the best gin in the country in a blind tasting, which didn't upset quite a few people. But I tell you what, it's fantastic value for money. So you've got to look at, when you go buying, well, you know, simple question is, what's the best wine? Well, it's the one you enjoy, isn't it? You know, you know, you find something you like. And a lot of these have little award labels on, gold and silver labels, and they're usually pretty good if it's a non-known brand. So we've got to try and grow our business to be a name that people recognise, and that's what we're slowly doing. Hence, trademark. So yeah.
So who are your main clients then, Bob?
I think it would be fair to say, well, I know 80%, 85% of our business is trade. So why is it trade? It's very simple. When we set this up, we obviously didn't know about lockdown. We didn't know about what was going to happen. And the biggest thing about cocktails is, if you go to a cocktail bar, and there are not many proper cocktail bars, they've got people that make cocktails every day. They can bounce it off the floor. They can do a little bit of fancy work, and they can do that. But more importantly, they don't measure. They just pour it, because they learn to know what the quantities are. Now, you go into a pub, club, restaurant. So let's take a typical pub, club, restaurant, or or pub and a restaurant. So they've got a couple of bars, they've got a restaurant, maybe 100 covers. So they've got 4, 5 people on the bars. So you go along. They don't want to make cocktails. They want to pour beer and pour wine. They don't want to do it because they can't remember it. They've got to get it right. And the mojito is typical. Mojito is typical. It's quite a complicated cocktail to make. And so one person makes it, somebody else makes it, it tastes different. It's inconsistent. I mean, making an old-fashioned, for instance, you've got to melt the sugar cube. You've got to get the bitters right. You've got to get, it can't be too sweet, it can't be. And we saw an opening in the market, and it's proved now to be right in that they can stock a variation. So we often say to them, just stock 4. In the summer, we'll have a strawberry daiquiri, we'll have something light. In the winter, we have a gin bramble. All they've got to do, take non-experienced staff who can basically read the can, and they can pour it. Now, they don't have to make a fuss about pouring it if they do it behind the bar. See, if you think about a pub restaurant, you get your order taken, somebody goes away and brings back a drink. Now, if you got, say, a table of 8, so we're 4 beers, please, and we want 4 different cocktails. Now, if you did it traditionally, that's going to take 12 minutes probably. If you do it with us and the glass is dressed nicely, it takes exactly the same time as pouring a pint. So you can get that order back out in less than 5 minutes, which means they might order some more because they've got it already.
Yeah,
Now,
especially if they taste nice.
If they taste nice, well, our repeat business is incredibly high. So we know and we're proud that it is right because we spent a lot of time getting it right. Because the simple theory is, well, what's the point of somebody buying one if they don't buy another one? You know, if everybody buys one and they never buy any more, we're out of business. So the whole key to this was taste. So if we get the taste right, and obviously marketing, well, yeah, they go hand in hand.
But you also do the gift boxes as well, don't you, Bob?
We do these gift boxes. Now they start off with 3, and the most popular one is 6, and it comes in like that. Now, what we do, it's very important. We actually put a postcard in and we put a message on the back. Now, you should not just give gifts at Christmas, or you shouldn't give them at Christmas at all. What you should do is give them on the anniversary of doing business, because people are going to take notice. Imagine getting a nice box of cocktails, 6 cans in May. You don't expect it. But imagine getting a lovely little postcard saying, really appreciate your business over the past year or so. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoy the contents. Have a lovely weekend. I'll be in touch. What have you got? You've got a real reason to phone up, because a lot of people get paid residual income, direct debit, they get paid standing order. Okay, they get paid by invoice. Now, some businesses don't really look after their customers off the got, and you get all excited getting a new one. You get really excited. Next year, you've forgotten that one, and you got another one. You got another one, but they're still paying you money, as in graphic design, as in branding. Now, you know, it might be that person comes back to you. You sort of tweak this, and you do that, and you do something else. Now, I'm not saying you should reward every customer, but they're not going to go away if they get freebies. Let's talk about exhibitions. We haven't done exhibitions now. Well, we're just starting to do them. You know, I've run out of pens, I've run out of mugs because I keep dropping them. I've run out of this, I've run out of that. Everybody likes a freebie. You know, I was at Excel for a particular brand of a company that had never been there before, but they wanted something different. So we did a private label cocktail. We actually did a private label cocktail for them. And our stand was the busiest stand for those 4 days. And they got their money back on day 2 for the stand. Now, Excel, I think they paid 15 grand. They got that money back in orders by day 2. Because what, very clever, yeah, very clever. What they did, they had lots of little tables, 2 seats. So they'd come up, I took my bar, I've got photos of it, took the bar, so be on the bar, would you like it? No, would you like a cocktail? And then somebody would come up and say, I'll tell you what, while you're enjoying that, why don't you come and sit down? So the logic, they couldn't run off the stand with a martini glass, could they?
No. Perfect.
So that's how the power of thinking about what's going on works.
Yeah, very much so. One final question, just out of, because I am a cocktail person, and how do you think the cocktails have changed? I mean, I have an idea, so I'd be interested to hear your input. 70s, I mean, they were very sort of popular, and then they sort of went a bit out of fashion, didn't they?
Yeah.
And now,
Yeah.
obviously, they're back in fashion. How have you seen the changes? What do you consider the main changes in
if we go back to the 60s and 70s, and I was there, I was working in London at the time, you had a lot of Hawaiian bars, a lot of tiki, you had a lot of that type of bar, and then it went out of fashion. Cocktails weren't really mentioned probably in the late 80s, 90s. They weren't really of it. What has changed everything is gin, the distillery of gin. I mean, my wholesaler's got 483 gins, I think. Now, that's crazy, because you might have had 10, 20, but you've got to be careful, because you've got gin liqueur, which is only 20%. So if you look at the bottles of gin for sale, and you'd be surprised, I've got the gin 37.5%, which it has to be, or higher. But you've also got, you've got all sorts of rhubarb and ginger liqueur, but it's 20%. So you've got to look at what there is. Now, the other thing is, obviously, when you make something with gin, don't put too much, mix it in. Forget the advert that says it's 2/3 of your drink or 3/4 of your drink. What you should do is, when you make a gin cocktail, is to put one measure of your mixer in and think, right, can I still taste the gin? Because otherwise you're just going to drown it. It's the same with, I mean, I like rum, because rum, I'm quite big. I like a sweet drink. And, the simplest cocktail probably is a Cuba Libre, which is literally just rum, fresh lime juice and cola. Now, the secret to that is, the reason I mention it is you want a decent rum. Now, that is called Bumbu. You can actually, I think you can get it in Tesco's now. And that is that's a Barbados rum. It's made on the island. It's distilled on the island with spices. So if you have this, you have some lime juice and cola, and you measure it in. So there are 2 of that, 3 of cola, half a lime, put a little bit of lime around it and drink it. You'll taste the rum. If you drown it, same with gin. If you put a whole bottle of tonic in, if you do that, you'll just kill it. You just won't know what on earth you've got. So that would be my advice. If you go to a bar and you have a gin and tonic, don't let them put all the tonic in, because I just give it back and say, well, I only want half of it in.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Bob. Thank you. Any questions for Bob? Anyone else have so many questions for cocktails, or am I just the only cocktail person here? I'm sure I'm not. Any questions?
I was going to say, the thing about cocktails, there are thousands of recipes, and the thing to do is just experiment. I talked about Cuba Libre, another one. So you can take that idea, and one of my favourite ones, and people just cannot work out what it is Dr. Pepper with lamb spice rum with lime. Oh.
Anna, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering, when you have all these cocktails, how much ice do you put in the glass?
Right. No. You see, depends on the drink. Because what you can do, if you can, is to make the glass cold. So keep glasses in the freezer. So if you've got a small party, keep your martini glasses in the freezer, your low ball, all of that, keep them cold. Now, when you make a mojito, you have crushed ice. You mustn't have large lumps of ice, because when you drink it, the texture is totally different. Some cocktails you would strain. So you'd shake it, you'd strain it and put it in the glass. Now, if the glass is cold, you've achieved exactly what you want without putting ice in. Now, if you're into whiskey, you don't put ice in whiskey or water if you can help it. Some people put water in, and that, in my opinion, should be Scottish water that's been frozen and put an ice cube in, Scottish water. Other than that, you should have what they call whiskey stones. So they're stones, they're solid stones, and you keep them in the freezer, you put them in, and it cools the drink down, because if you dilute it too much, again, you've gone. So take Australia, incredibly hot. So you've got to keep everything cool as you can. Now, I mean, I used to keep some of my spirit in the freezer because alcohol won't freeze. So I would actually have, when I did an event, I'd take a freezer and put the alcohol in it, and it kept it cold. So this is the key to ice. And I've got three ice machines. I've got one that's very, very fine. So I would use that in a martini glass. So literally as you drunk it, it melted in your mouth. I've got a medium one, which is a hand one. And then I've got another electric one, which is for speed, because it will do 10 kilograms an hour when you've got parties where you've just got to have ice. So experiment.
Thank you. Amazing. Thanks, Bob.